Greetings. I am making this video as a response to Varg Vikernes from channel ThuleanPerspective. I think there is one area in which you spread total misinformation. That area consists of anthropology and genetics. I am not certain if it is being done deliberately or if it is being done out of pure lack of knowledge. The first thing I want to talk about are, of course, Neanderthals, cro-magnons and their relation to modern Europeans. Bear in mind that I only refer to Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic Europeans as cro-magnons. Firstly, I want to explain a bit on European racial history. It is crucial to know that modern Europeans are, in anthropological sense, a mixture of three ancient populations. First one are native European hunter-gatherers, or so-called cro-magnons. Second one are IndoEuropeans, or Aryans, the steppe nomads. And the third one are Neolithic farmers. Although the later two spread through Europe in Neolithic and Bronze Age, they are nevertheless as European in racial sense as native hunter-gatherers are. Remember, pure Europoid race was spread out much further in the past than it is now. Middle East and North Africa are still mainly European, but now have a considerable amount of sub-Saharan African influence, and hence they can't be considered racially European anymore. It can be often heard from you that the so-called Nordic, or Hallstatt Nordic type, is anthropologically the closest to the Neanderthals. You base your opinion on your own theory that Neanderthals were all blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Not only do you not have any proof for that, but pigmentation is not the only thing on which a race or a subrace is based. On the other hand, you call cro-magnons, that is, native European hunter-gatherers, as mulattoes and wishlings. You say they are terribly genetically deformed, and, quoting, they have fucked up teeth. It's like someone randomly threw teeth into their jaws. Of course, what you said there could not be any further from truth. What is also very contradictory in your statements is that you boasted about how Scandinavians are genetically closest to Kostenki 14 specimen from Upper Paleolithic Russia. Yet Kostenki is also a cro-magnon, the member of the very same type which you deem as wishlings. So I will briefly describe here why modern descendants of Upper Paleolithic European racial types, or so-called cro-magnons, are closest to the Neanderthals, and Nordic types are not. First thing is skull shape. When we look from above, we can notice that both Neanderthals and cro-magnons have a so-called pentagonoid skull shape. That is, their parietal bones flare abruptly sideways. Here we have La Chapelle Neanderthal skull, and here we have Le AZ1 specimen, or so-called Old Man of Cro-Magnon. Now, let's look at what the skull of the Nordic type looks like. This one was taken from Hans Ginter's book Racial Elements of European History. Notice that it is totally different from last two skulls. The skull is quite narrow and the sides of skull are running nearly parallel all the way down to the occiput. Second thing is that foramen magnum, an opening located on the lower part of the skull through which the spinal cord passes, is shifted posteriorly in cro-magnons, just like in Neanderthals. That means that although their skulls had a very prominent occipital region, it would not be so noticeable in the flesh, as the neck skin would be stretched out far on the back of their heads. This is contrary to what the Nordic type has, as its foramen magnum is more anteriorly shifted, and that means occipital prominence in Nordic individuals will always be clearly seen, as on those examples. Third and most important thing are the metrics of the skulls. Neanderthals and cro-magnons both have fairly wide and long brain cases, with very high cranial capacity, although Neanderthal skulls are a bit wider and a bit shorter than cro-magnon ones on average. In contrast, Nordics have somewhat long and quite narrow skulls. As for facial metrics, both Neanderthals and cro-magnons have wide faces and jaws, that is, bizygomatic and bigonial width with very flaring zygomatic arches, while Nordics have very laterally compressed faces, with lateral dimensions being small in every single way. In fact, Nordic type, that is, the type of the steppe Indo-European nomads that conquered Europe, except for pigmentation of hair and eyes, is virtually in most cases identical to Mediterranean types, that is, the types of Neolithic farmers that have spread agriculture through Europe. They are both quite different from Aboriginal European hunter-gatherers, or cro-magnons, or true Neanderthals, as you referred to them in last video on this matter. And I really need you to understand this. Cro-magnons are native European hunter-gatherers. They are not Mishlings. They are the very same people whom you referred to as pure Neanderthals who never migrated from Europe. Also, just to answer your claim that Cro-magnons, that is, old European hunter-gatherers, have fucked up teeth. That is not true at all. You might have seen some poorly preserved skulls with many teeth missing and you got wrong impression. But native European hunter-gatherers had perfectly healthy teeth. Check out this skull from Oberkassel from late Paleolithic Germany. Notice how it has literally perfect dentition. Now I will talk about the hot topic here, and that is pigmentation. I will start off with hair pigmentation. Firstly, I will point out the obvious fact that hair is made up from dead cells and hence it has no role in absorption of vitamin D at all. Quoting Carleton Coon's statement from his book The Races of Europe. Black skin and a black eye then may be variables which are advantageous under hot, bright equatorial light condition. A partly depigmented skin and fundus condition can perhaps survive without disadvantage only in a climate where the light is weak. Blonde hair, however, cannot be assigned any survival value of either a negative or a positive character. Many native Melanesians and Australian Aborigines have blonde hair, even though they live under conditions with lot of light, so we can without doubt say that blonde hair is non-functional trait. In your last video, you claimed that Indo-Europeans from the steppes are responsible for majority of blonde hair in Europe because they were so numerous, and that native hunter-gatherers were also blonde anyways. However, that is not true. Majority of hunter-gatherers from Paleolithic and Mesolithic Europe that were tested so far had dark hair. A few had reddish-brown hair, and one sample from Goyet in Belgium had red hair. That fact is also verifiable without genetic proof, since most Europeans today belonging to Upper Paleolithic racial type also have either dark or red hair. In cases of blonde hair among them today, which is product of mixing with the Indo-Europeans, they almost always have golden or reddish blonde hair, that is, blonde hair with reddish pigment in it. They never have ash blonde hair, which is characteristic of Nordic individuals. We have plenty of genetic proof that Indo-Europeans have broad blonde hair. Samples tested from Andronovo culture, for example, were uniformly blonde-haired and light-eyed. Another proof for it that can be seen without genetics, as modern bearers of Indo-European racial type, so-called Nordic type, are mainly blonde. Even when they are brown-haired, they are completely devoid of the same reddish pigment found among native hunter-gatherers or cro-magnons. This also refutes your statement that red hair originated among Egyptian nobility, or that it somehow occurred due to mixing of Neanderthals with Africans in the previous Ice Age. Both genetic and anthropological research show rufosity originates among Paleolithic European hunter-gatherers, and that is not only limited to hair color, but also to skin qualities, such as freckling and inability to tan. Quoting Carleton Coon again, by means of this study it is possible to reconstruct with some probability the living appearance of the Upper Paleolithic man. The hair was brown and wavy, frequently rufous, of medium abundance on beard and body, the eyes light mixed blue. The skin was typically inclined to freckling and very fair. Also, I want to quickly address your claim that Germanic peoples and Viking Age Scandinavians were all blonde. You base your claim on quote from Tacitus saying so, but he got his information from second-hand sources and they were prone to overgeneralizing things. Surely Germanics were and still are very blonde, but not all of them are. We must cautiously approach claims of ancient historians. Procopius, for example, claimed all Slavs were of reddish pigmentation, even though from modern anthropological research we know that rufosity is virtually absent in Slavs today. It's on the level of a statistical error. We also have analysis of Viking Age Icelander sagas, which show Norsemen were quite variable in their hair pigmentation. Now, I know you will claim that is because Icelanders were heavily mixed with Scots and Irish, but those descriptions of sagas specifically mention the first generation of Iceland's settlers, and all drawn from noble Jarl classes of Western Norway. I will now read this analysis taken from the book The Races of Europe. In a total of 33 of the longer poems, the bards who composed the sagas gave physical descriptions of 67 early Icelandic persons, all important and drawn mostly from the noble class. Of these, 54 were called large or tall, and only 3 medium-sized. In regard to hair quantity, 8 out of 9 men were said to have long hair and 1 thick. 6 out of 7 men had curly hair and 1 straight. The following hair colors were observed for 19 males: 2 grey, 1 white, 2 golden blonde, 3 blonde, 3 red, 1 light brown, 4 brown, and 3 black. 1 female was given black hair. Of 3 beard color noticed, 2 were red and 1 grey. 1 man had blue eyes and 2 women black. Although these observations do not form a statistically valid series or a random sample, yet they may be regarded as ample proof that the ancestors of the Icelanders were of variable pigmentation. Since the persons described were all of high rank, the chances are that most of them were pure Norwegians, and that the pigmentation map of Western Norway was not very different 1,000 years ago from what it is today. Moving on to pigmentation of eyes, it starts getting a little trickier. We don't actually know for sure if light eyes have adaptational value or not. You argued that it may be advantageous for living in dark forests, and that may be true. However, we must remember that Indo-Europeans, who were light-eyed, lived in steppes, and that northern hunter-gatherers in Europe have lived in a very treeless landscape that very much resembled modern tundras. Most of nocturnal animals today have dark eye color, so it seems pigmentation is not detrimental in ability to see in darkness. What is detrimental, however, is count of rod cells in the eye. All nocturnal animals have much more rod cells in eyes than other animals, and some have retinas comprised exclusively of rod cells, in contrast to other animals which have high amount of cone cells. From genetic tests we can learn quite a lot. When talking about cro-magnons, it seems brown eyes dominated in Paleolithic Europe, while blue eyes dominated in Mesolithic Europe. One way to explain this is that Paleolithic Europe was much colder and landscape had less trees, so brown eyes helped in preventing snow blindness. While climate in Mesolithic Europe was warmer, there were more forests, and hence blue eyes could prove advantageous there. But bear in mind that this is just a possible explanation I have. We still can't explain how IndoEuropeans from the treeless steppes were light-eyed in that case. Light enters eye through pupil, not through the rest of iris, so most likely it is the count of rod cells in eye that really matters for night vision, and not eye pigmentation. Moving on to skin pigmentation. Now this is the pigmentational trait that really matters. If you don't have diet rich with sea mammal meat, like Eskimos have, and you live in dark climate, you do need lighter skin in order to absorb enough vitamin D in order to function correctly. All 3 European groups, that is, native hunter-gatherers, Indo-Europeans and Neolithic farmers, had light skin. However, there still were some differences among them regarding that matter. Firstly, I want to clarify false claims that Ice Age Europeans had dark skin. It is simply not true. Skin color, unlike hair and eye color, has a lot more genes that control it, and many are not yet discovered, even today. According to genetic research, 10% of Orcadians, for example, lack known genes for light skin, despite them being population that, together with Irish, is the most lightest skinned on the whole planet. Some Asian peoples, like Amur Manchus, for example, completely lack known genes for light skin among Asians, yet they still have light skin. Due to lack of light in Paleolithic Europe, it is only natural for them to also have had light skin, but their genes for light skin are simply not yet discovered. And this is also verifiable in reality, since modern Europeans of Paleolithic type have lightest skin out of all Europeans, often lacking the tanning ability. In your red hair text on ThuleanPerspective blog, you claim that people who can't tan descend from Neanderthals mixed with Africans in previous ice age, and that sunburns actually mean accumulation of red pigment. That is not true at all. Sunburns are manifestation of damage to blood vessels lying underneath the skin, and they happen exactly due to lack of melanin in skin. You also claim that Europeans who can tan, like those of Nordic type, are more racially pure. That is not true, because it simply means they lived under conditions where occasional tanning might be advantageous to them. Nordic type, when exposed to sun, does tan rather heavily, as much as does the skin of Mediterranean types. Even Nazi propaganda idealized Nordic type as heavily tanned, as can be seen on those Norwegian propaganda posters. In contrast to Nordic and Mediterranean types, Upper Paleolithic European types cannot tan nearly as well, and freckled skin which sunburns often is their characteristic, as I have already said. While I'm still on it, I want to address your claim that Scandinavians are purer than other Europeans because they remained for thousands and thousands of years relatively isolated. That is actually not true, as going by Epsilon DNA haplogroups which are passed by male line, paternal ancestors of about 95% of modern Scandinavians didn't even live in Scandinavia before the Neolithic. I know haplogroup tells us nothing about the individual, but on a greater level like this, they are very good for tracking migrations. Judging by ancient DNA, most of ancient Northern Europeans belonged to the I2 haplogroup, specifically to the I2A1b and Northern I2A1A1 branch, not to be confused with Sardinian branch of it, which split away more than 70,000 years earlier. We have samples from Motala in Sweden, we have samples from pitted ware culture on Gotland, and we have samples from Great Britain until the Neolithic, and they all had those same branches of I2 haplogroup. So, from whom the modern Scandinavians descend then? Well, about 60% of them have Germanic branches of haplogroups R1a and R1b, which came during the Indo-European settlement. Roughly 40% of them have I haplogroup, mostly I1. It is a native European hunter-gatherer haplogroup, but it didn't actually live in Scandinavia. Its earliest finding is among Neolithic farmers from Hungary. It was originally a small branch of hunter-gatherers living in Central Europe. Then, as they picked up agriculture from Neolithic farmers, their population numbers rose, they spread to north, and being much more numerous, they all shadowed the other native hunter-gatherers, who bore aforementioned branches of the I2 haplogroup. So you might ask, where do the male line descendants of those Scandinavian and northern hunter-gatherers live today? Well, many still live there, but they are far less numerous than the descendants of the I1 haplogroup and the descendants of the Indo-European R1, and oddly enough, descendants of those same I2 haplogroup found in Mesolithic Sweden are pretty much often common on the Western Balkans today. I won't go into this deeply, but I think that the most logical explanation there could be is that they descend from East Germanic tribes, most notably the Goths. They were originally hunter-gatherers of Northern Europe that got Germanicized, then as they moved through Europe at unknown period in history they got Slavicized and finally end up there. In this video I have talked quite a lot about three fundamental groups from which Europeans descend. Unlike you, I don't think that one is more European racially than the other. I think they are all equally European, as it is natural for some variations to occur during thousands of years even without mixing with non-Europeans. The fact that native hunter-gatherers are closest to archaic Neanderthals morphologically doesn't mean much, as Neanderthals weren't static themselves, but changed over course of hundreds of thousands of years, even without mixing. So to summarize, those three groups from which we descend are just branches on a tree of greater European race, all equally pure. I hope you found this video interesting. Thanks for watching.